Okay, this is a reaction video. I've got my headset on. I'm going to test this out, see if this improves my audio a bit. This is from Lawrence, Lost in the Pond. Seven myths British people believe about America, Part 2. So let's see what this is all about.
Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved TV shows. I'm Lawrence Brown, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to myths. Specifically, myths that British people like myself believe about the United States.
And there's still myths that people in America believe about Britain, but I'm not going to get into those, at least not right now.
Real fans of Lost in the Pond will know that I've...
I mean, one thing is that you guys are actually a good footballing nation. That's a huge myth in America that you guys are actually pretty good at playing football. So that's something that was proven when you guys still haven't beaten the United States in the World Cup. So that's kind of one of the big myths. So you can understand that.
I've already done a part 1 in this series, so I will link to that at the end. And if you want to become a real fan...
I don't know if I've done that one yet, but I will look into that, see if I've done that yet.
And you're not yet subscribed to this channel, do that now. Thanks. You see, after doing part 1 and having lived in the United States for 14 years and 12 days, I realised that there were just lots of falsehoods that I used to believe about the United States of America, thus warranting a second video. And so, without further ado, here are 7 myths that British people believe about the United States, part 2.
Everybody thinks in America, everybody in America, swimming pools are very rare for people. I mean, my parents have a swimming pool at their house down in Florida, but not a lot of people that I know of ever grew up where I grew up ever owned a swimming pool.
I used to have this friend when I lived in England who came from a wealthy family, and it was always the topic of conversation among people.
Yeah, there were wealthy people who had swimming pools. In fact, there was a house in the place where I used to live where they actually had an indoor swimming pool.
People, whenever we'd speak about this person, that they had a swimming pool, and this was very, very unusual for Britain. But American television shows and Jack Black's Instagram page tend to give us this impression that every house in America has its own swimming pool. And this isn't even close to being true, because a lot of Americans I speak to say they can't even afford a swimming pool, but some would say that even if they could, they wouldn't want to put up with the maintenance.
The other thing about a swimming pool is depending on where you live. Like if you put in a swimming pool up in the north, up in Ohio, like Ohio where I live, you'd only be able to use it maybe 4 or 5 months out of the year.
Of it, because you know it takes a lot to keep that thing clean and chlorified and whatever else.
Yeah, it also needs a maintenance and everything to upkeep, so it is expensive.
You have to do to it, and most houses I've been to simply don't have one. But I will say this, I think they are slightly more prevalent in the US than they are in Britain. Some houses will have them, some apartment complexes have them. In fact, I lived at one that did, and it was always packed, so I never went in it. I talk a lot on this channel about the sheer size of the United States, but there's also something to be said of the slender size of Britain. So growing up there, you very much got used to this idea that you could drive anywhere in the country well within a day, actually within a third of a day. And because Britain becomes the kind of yardstick by which you see the rest of the world.
Yeah, I guess we are kind of spoiled. Well, you guys spoiled over there to a certain extent that you could get anywhere in a day, and you could probably do a whole lot of traveling in Great Britain, or at least in England. And I'm not saying you can see everything. Don't get me wrong, but you could probably go, you know, north, south, east, west, see a lot if you wanted to in a week. A heck of a lot more than you do in the United States.
You sort of assume you can do that in other countries. And for me, the United States was surely no different. So when I visited in 2004, my ex-American girlfriend probably laughed at me when I suggested we do New York, California, and the Grand Canyon.
And you hear that a lot sometimes when people come to the United States and they want to see everything that the United States has to offer. And Walter's World has done a pretty good idea, talked about this, about how big the United States really is in terms of if I'm in, if you're coming from another country in the United States, you want to see New York, you want to see Miami, you want to see, this, you want to see California, you want to see the Grand Canyon, you want to see Yellowstone, you want to see all these things, you're not going to be able to do it. Okay, you will literally be land, stay the night in New York. You can't see everything in New York City. get on a plane, go to Miami. I mean, it's just an act. Pick a spot and go and see it, and then when you come back, pick another spot. That's the best way to do it in the United States.
In a single week. Because it is big, right? One of the shortest routes from the East Coast to the West Coast is Savannah to San Diego. It takes 36 hours by car. Now, if you were to drive this route, which seems unlikely, you might be thinking, it's only a day and a half, we'll bring DVDs. Just remember that you have to eat and sleep and go to the toilet and take pictures of yourself over something iconic. You're probably not doing this journey in less than 3 days, so that's more or less half your week gone with just that. And that's the shortest route. If for whatever reason you find yourself driving from Fort Kent, Maine, all the way to Seattle, Washington, that's about 50 hours by car, and even then you have to cheat by driving through Canada.
Now, well, that's not true. But anyway, when it comes to long road trips and things like that, I took a road trip last year and I drove 1,500 miles. And that was land in Denver, drive up to Gillette, Wyoming. That's Wyoming is a state that's north of Colorado. Then went to see Devil's Tower, drove into Montana to Little Bighorn, and then all the way to South Dakota and saw Mount Rushmore, and then back down to Denver. That's 4 states. Was it 1, 2? Yeah, 4 states in one little area, and that's 1,500 miles. 1,500 miles that we did. So yeah, it's a big country. Now he just said here said Americans don't watch soccer, football. That is a myth. Okay, we do watch it. Okay, and it's actually gotten a lot bigger in recent years. When I was growing up in the 70s, 80s as a fan, I couldn't watch it at all. Okay, I couldn't watch any games, and every time that the opportunity presented itself, I would jump at the opportunity. And one of the things that I can tell you about back in the day, whenever they showed a football match on TV, they would actually interrupt the match with commercials. Okay, because every 10 minutes you get about 3 or 4 minutes worth of commercials, and then you bring it back. They would treat it like it wasn't until 1993 the first time they ever showed a football match the way it's supposed to be shown, where 40 without commercial interruptions, full 45 minutes, and then have your commercials. And ever since then, in the 1994 World Cup, they did that, and ever since then, they've been doing it the right way. But back in the day, that's how they showed it, because back at that time, that people didn't watch it a lot, but now people do watch it. It's getting a lot of viewership, and a lot more people are watching the game, a lot more than I ever thought would ever be possible.
I am old enough to remember the 1994 World Cup, and for those of you who don't remember it, it was staged here in the United States. And at the time, I remember a lot of the narrative coming out of the British media was that the United States and its people don't care about football/soccer. But now that I live here, I've discovered that that is still sort of true, but not to the degree I thought it would be. I mean, sure, soccer is still way behind the big four, so NFL, baseball, hockey, and basketball. But whenever I've been into one of those authentic British-style pubs that you find in the United States, and there's a football match on from the Premier League, there's usually quite a lot of people in there, and I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, that's just other English immigrants. And that is partly true, but you'll hear a lot of American accents too. And, they'll be bashing the referee along with the rest of us. Not literally, we get a bit rowdy. And here in Chicago, where you have the Chicago...
Now, this is also, I'm doing this during the World Cup in 2022, and the most tickets sold besides Qataris were sold to the people from the United States. And people love the World Cup. It's great. It's getting tremendous ratings over here. And you can see the Premier League over here. You can see Serie A, Bundesliga, Ligue 1, the Spanish Premier League. You can see it, La Liga. You can see a lot of football, okay, all the time. And we're still proud of the fact that you guys still haven't beaten us in a World Cup. We had a great game. We unfortunately went out yesterday to the Dutch, rightfully so. The Dutch were a much better team than we were. But we're going to be hosting the World Cup in 2026. We want y'all to come on. We love it. And by the way, I went to a game in the World Cup in 1994. I went to the United States Switzerland game in Michigan, Pontiac Silverdome, Michigan.
Chicago Fire, I often meet soccer fans proudly wearing the jersey of Manchester United. And once every 4 years, we have this little
Screw Manchester United. Arsenal's where it's at.
thing come around called the World Cup. And if the United States is involved in that, as they are at this one, Americans start to take an interest until they lose to England this Friday. The other thing to mention...
We didn't lose to England this Friday. We drew. Our record against England in the World Cup is a 1950, a 1-0 victory for us. And in 2010, a draw. Thank you very much, Rob Green. We appreciate that. Thanks for the effort. Great job. And this time, I thought we were the better team, but it was still a well-played game, 0-0.
Mention is that soccer is played quite widely in American schools, right? You'll just be driving down the road and you'll be like, oh, there's a goalpost in America, and they're all over the place. And this is because American girls and boys seem to play soccer all the way throughout their education and then just stop. Although some do go on to play professionally, and in the case of the women's team, routinely win the World Cup. And while yes, that long-held belief that it is in fact Americans who are wrong with their pronunciations. Firstly, has anyone ever stopped to consider that maybe none of us are wrong? That there isn't a right way to say aluminium, there are just different ways. And secondly, I constantly get surprised while researching for this channel that American pronunciation of words or spelling of words or just the words themselves are often more in line with the word's origin. Take the word herb, for example, and watch my YouTube short about that very thing. The H, which most Americans drop, was originally silent in French. The way Americans pronounce the L's differently when they say paella is very much in line with how they do it in Spain. Our own British offering of paella isn't. And I could run down hundreds more examples, but that's what my YouTube shorts are for. During my life on this planet, I've definitely heard British people make...
I heard that about pronunciations and things like that. You get used to things like trying to think like names like when Louis van Gaal was at Manchester United, he had Louis van Gaal, and it's Louis van Gaal. But hey, it is what it is. And Americans are rude. We're not rude. We're loud. We can be offensive sometimes, and I think in some cases we can even be very, very a pain in the wazoo if you want to know the truth. But I don't know that we're actually rude.
The assertion that Americans are rude. And it's a weird thing because, of course, there are rude Americans. You're never going to get rid of those. But there are rude
Americans, rude Brits, rude French, rude Germans, rude, you name it. There's plenty of rude people.
British people too. And rudeness is something you pretty much find everywhere. And I have to say, at least in the Midwest, where I've lived in about 4 different cities now, I don't feel like I've encountered a higher degree of rudeness here than I did in the UK. And on the whole, just like with the UK, most people try to be polite. Actually, if anything, in the UK we have this thing among friends known as banter, in which we call each other names that if I said right now would probably get me demonetized. And in my experience, that banter does spill over into rude territory, because sometimes Uncle Toby doesn't know when he's gone too far. So rudeness is sort of relative, and I tend to believe that there are no higher percentage of rude Americans.
And we have banter too. We call each other names. My friend told me he was going in for a colonoscopy, and if you don't know what that is, well, make a long story short. I told him I already know what the doctor's going to tell you. They said after doing the colonoscopy, we found your head. It was right where we thought it was going to be, and he said, "I'm going to smack you," and he didn't smack me, but no, I thought it was funny. He did too.
Americans than any other people on Earth. I think instinctively we all...
The U.S. doesn't have many. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. I can definitely tell somebody from the South versus somebody from the North. I can tell somebody from Boston or somebody from New York City. We have accents. We have many, many accents here in the United States.
Think this about every country on earth except our own, because we know that our own country represents something of a rich tapestry of dialects. We just sort of become hyper aware of that fact and just assume that nowhere else in the world can say the same thing. And because I grew up in Britain, I was very much attuned to the fact that we had various Yorkshire dialects, Scouse, Mancunian, Geordie, Scottish dialects, Welsh dialects, Irish dialects, Cockney, but I didn't have that same awareness of American dialects. To us, there's just 3. There's General American, whatever that is. There's the dialect used by mobsters in films set in New York, and then the South, and that's about it. But it was only after I lived here for a few years that I really started to hear quite a lot of differences in the sounds that would come from various parts of just the Midwest. You got the way they speak in Chicago, which is not that, is my best impersonation. You got the way they speak in Wisconsin, which I'm not even going to try to do. And then the way they speak in Indiana, which sounds closer to Southern, in my opinion. And that's
Yeah, you hear a lot of Southern dialects up north and a lot of Northern dialects down south. Not everybody speaks the same, obviously, and you're a product of your environment. But yeah, look, there's many different accents in the United States. You just get used to it.
That's just the region I've lived in. You go to the East Coast, there's an absolutely mental amount of differences in the way people say words, or the words themselves, especially if you're ordering a sub sandwich. Same in the South, same in the West, same in the Rockies, same in the Pacific Northwest. It's almost a poem, just without the Great Plains. The Great Plains. And finally,
Americans don't have a well. I think Americans have a sense of humor. Now, I love the British sense of humor. I mean, I grew up with Monty Python, and there's shows like Chef, and trying to think of some other ones. I like Coupling. That was a very good show. I think Brits have a tremendous sense of humor, but I think Americans do as well.
finally, I've touched on this before. I think that Americans, much like Germans, often get this reputation that they don't have a sense of humor. What we actually mean.
That's something I didn't know, that we had that reputation of not having a sense of humor. I don't know. Maybe I've heard the fact that we're loud, obnoxious, that we think we're better than everybody else. I've heard things that Americans um, are not smart about what's going on around the world. I mean, they're smart to some extent, but they don't know certain things. Like they didn't know that in Brazil they have the internet, or in South Africa that they have the internet. They didn't know that Australians speak English. That there's not some language for Australians that's separate from English. But I've heard a lot of things when I've watched these videos and reacted to some of these videos, but never really heard that the Americans don't have a sense of humor.
When we say that is they don't have a British sense of humor. How dare America?
We don't have a British. Well, our sense of humor now is actually kind of crap now when you think about it. Just think about it, because you have so many people who want to be politically correct and woke and this cancel culture garbage, which I think is stupid. But back in the day when I was growing up, Americans had a great sense of humor.
America differ from that in any conceivable way. But they do. They even spell humour differently, which should have been our first clue. One of the chief accusations that you'll hear from the British is that Americans don't understand sarcasm, that to them the concept of irony is reserved for the nation's industrial workers. That was a joke about iron. But this has never
Thanks, got it.
been my experience. Long before I moved to the United States, I recognized these very traits in The Onion, both the satirical rag and the vegetable, whose comedy doesn't get enough credit for how multi-layered it is. And if you're interested in this subject and you would like a more detailed breakdown on how these differences manifest, then check out my video, 5 Ways British and American Humour is Very Different. But that's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below some of the myths that you've believed about either Britain or America. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that I don't have to. Please consider supporting Lost in the Pond on Patreon.
Okay, that was Lawrence from Lost in the Pond. 7 Myths British People Believe About America, Part 2. I don't know if I've done Part 1, but I'll have to look at that. Well, thanks for watching. Please click like, share, and subscribe for Lawrence, Lost in the Pond. Please click like, share, and subscribe for me. And have a good rest of your day. Thanks for watching.